And we are live. Welcome to Crypto Law TV. I'm John Deaton, the founder and your host. I'm not going to waste any time. I got two special guests. We're going to dive into the SBF trial. I want to welcome two panelists, Sam Lyman and Scott Melker. So everybody knows that Sam is a public policy director at Riot Platforms. Full disclosure, I own stock in Riot. Sam probably didn't know that, of course. A leading Bitcoin mining company and a contributor to Forbes. Scott Melker, we all know as the Wolf of All Streets, a trader and investor, his own podcaster, helps run Crypto Town Hall, many other talents, used to be a world-renowned DJ. That's one of my favorite things about him. Welcome, guys.
Thank you.
John, great to be with you.
All right. Now, I always like bringing people on to have a different perspective than mine. So the first thing I'm going to throw out there, and I'll start with you, Scott. And then the same question to Sam, and then I'll give my 2 cents. What's your opinion of the trial so far, and has it differed from your expectations?
I think the broad strokes are exactly what I expected, but a lot of the nuance is very different. And I think that that's mostly a result of how early this fraud started and how the company clearly was a fraud from the very beginning. And that was a bit surprising to me because we've seen other examples. Many people know I'm a Voyager creditor, so I followed that case very closely. I think in that case, the hunt for yield eventually sent them further down the risk curve where they made mistakes, but I don't think they started off with any intention of doing wrong by their customers. Clearly, when you look at the testimony in this case, assuming that it's true, going back to 2019, they were already programming in backdoors, allowing Alameda Research to have negative balances up to a $65 billion credit line. The numbers and the revelations there are absurd. And it's very, very clear, in my opinion, that FTX was never really SBF's core business. To me, it seems like Alameda was always his baby and FTX was the piggy bank for his baby, which was Alameda Research. And that's not really how I anticipated it. I always thought that FTX was really this incredible business and he just got greedy and committed fraud because he had the opportunity to do so. But it seems that the way that this was structured, that even before the last bull market, when Sam made all of his money, since it was everybody else's money, obviously, even before he was already putting in these backdoors and allowances for Alameda to take advantage of the customer. So I think the scale of the fraud and how coordinated and how he was clearly the mastermind from the very beginning is what is different than what I expected.
Great. What about you, Sam?
Yeah, it's a great question. I'm just disappointed that a man named Sam is giving other Sams in crypto a bad name, to be frank. And so we have to stand up for the Sams in crypto who are trying to do the right thing. In large part, when I saw this trial unfold, I would say they are who we thought they were, and we let them off the hook. So much of what has happened in this trial so far has pointed to the fact that there's a lot of damning evidence against SBF. If I were to describe the trial in one word, it would be just that, damning. I mean, it's damning that SBF's closest friends and confidants have all testified against him up to this point. It's damning that each one of them is pleading guilty to the very same crimes that SBF denies. And it's damning that the little defense SBF can muster is that he can't concentrate in the courtroom because he hasn't taken his Aderall. I mean, if the defense wanted us to believe SBF was anything other than a drug-addled gambler who bilked retail for billions, then they're not doing a very good job at it. So I think a lot of this is played out in a way that those of us on crypto Twitter who have followed this case pretty closely from the get-go, there's not a whole lot of huge surprises except for some of the salacious details that have come out in witness testimony over the past few days.
Yeah, listen, Scott said something. He said, assuming it's all true, as a former federal prosecutor, I used to have a saying to the jury right off the bat. I would say, listen, if sins are conceived in hell, I don't have any angels that I can put on the stand to tell you how it all went down. And so I usually try to address it that way. As far as what you're saying, Sam, with the defense, there's one strategy. As a former federal prosecutor, a former defense attorney, I only see one viable strategy in this case. Sam has to take the stand, and you have to get one juror. You have to get one juror to convince that, oh, it all got ahead of me, and I just got, seduced by it all, and I'm sorry. I never formed the criminal specific intent to commit fraud. You get one juror hung, then you go to the prosecution before they go a second bite at the apple, and you strike a deal. You look at the prosecutor and you say, hey, I've seen your entire case now, pal. I'm even going to be better this time. I got one the first time. I'm getting 3, 4, maybe them all. Can you imagine the pressure that puts on the government? Then you can get a deal for maybe 10 years or something like that. Absent that strategy, I don't see anything or any viable way of a good outcome. And they're repeating everything that the direct examination said. They're getting chastised by the judge. And so, that's how I see it. The other thing for Sam, I'm someone who said, and I think I responded to one of Scott's tweets where I said, I'll be shocked if he doesn't testify because there is no other option for him. Plus, when you plead guilty, you have to allocute, you have to get up and say to the world, that, yes, I intended from the beginning, just as Scott said, to commit fraud and to steal people's money. And so that's where we stand. Let me ask you guys this. I want to talk about the media landscape. Sam, let's start with you on this one. Because of your experience in politics and media, I want to know, what do you think about the coverage ahead of the trial and what stood out to you?
Yeah, what stood out to me most of all, I'll start by explaining this. With every legal trial, there are actually two trials going on. There's the trial in the court of law and the trial in the court of public opinion. And I think what surprised me most coming into this case was that Sam Bankman-Fried still has some pretty powerful allies in the court of public opinion. So something that happened that I don't think people really latched onto as much as they should have is the fact that Michael Lewis's book, Going Infinite, was actually released the exact same day as the trial started. Now, was that a coincidence? Of course not. That was something that was done deliberately to maximize book sales and public attention. And I think in a last-ditch effort to rehabilitate Sam Bankman-Fried's reputation. And so what's been so interesting about Going Infinite in that book, and what I think a lot of people didn't expect, is that it actually has a pretty sympathetic portrait of SBF. And I think that's critical because right now SBF, his reputation is being attacked left and right from a lot of mainstream media sources. But then you have one of the most reputable people on Wall Street, Michael Lewis. He's no small name in Manhattan. I mean, this is the same guy who wrote Flash Boys and The Big Short. He has a strong reputation, and he's out there saying, maybe not necessarily defending Sam Bankman-Fried to the point of saying that he's innocent, but saying that he is someone who was a boy genius who essentially just got in over his head. And he said things to the extent of, there's a Sam Bankman-Fried hole in the universe that needs to be filled. Again, this book that he wrote was somewhat of a hagiography of SBF, which I didn't expect there to be that many defenders of SBF coming into the trial. But clearly, he still has some people under his spell that are willing to defend him at the expense, to a certain extent, of their own reputation. So I think that's what surprised me the most going in, was that even though there's so much evidence that would seem to indict Sam Bankman-Fried, and I know that the case isn't closed yet, but there's a lot of evidence out there that seems to support these allegations of fraud. Even so, there's a lot of people in the media still who are powerfully defending him, whether it's through Michael Lewis's new book or certain defenders he has in corporate circles as well.
All right, before I go to Scott, let me just say this, though. You said, is it under his spell? Is it a spell or is it under his bankroll, is my question. And as far as the coincidence, I believe he called it a letter to the jury. Isn't that right, Scott?
Yeah.
Wasn't his book called A Letter to the Jury? So, as someone who's dialed in on the digital platforms and the conversations you're having, which is quite often, Scott, what's your take on it?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the court of public opinion is probably different depending on which public you're talking about. The crypto community that was directly hurt by this obviously has indicted him, convicted him, wants him buried underneath the jail forever, long before this trial ever happened, because he had such a disproportionately negative effect on the industry, hurt so many individuals that are in the industry. And the FTX fraud and collapse, I think, really hit much deeper than a lot of the other ones that we've discussed in the past, the Voyager, Celsius, and BlockFi's, because this was the truly crypto native people, the actual hedge funds, the institutions that were trading, they were all hurt. This wasn't just your average retail person, which, by the way, is worse to a degree, but with $100 who put their money into Celsius thinking it was a bank account. This was the hedge funds that have been here since 2014. They had $5, $10 million, $20 million trading on it. So I think that there's obviously a natural indication that people in the crypto industry want blood, right? And so I think that the crypto media has taken a much more aggressive tack towards him justifiably. I mean, Michael Lewis clearly decided to write a book and forgot about everything that happened after last November. It's insane. It's literally like he wrote a book. He had a premise and he was like, oh man, like I have to rewrite this as a bad guy. Screw it. I'm putting this thing out. Right. But I think as the case continues, it just becomes, as we've said, much more damning. I will say what's really interesting, being that this is a global industry and not just an industry that's in the United States. I was in Singapore for Token 2049 last month, which was this massive crypto convention, 10,000 people there. No talk about Gary Gensler and regulation, Sam Bankman-Fried, Celsius, BlockFi, Voyager, any of it. It's actually almost like living in two worlds when you're in this industry, which is the United States and everywhere else. The SBF trial, actually, you wouldn't believe this, but and everything that happened was just another news story in China and South Korea and Singapore and Dubai, places where they're very favorable towards the crypto industry. Things are moving forward as if there's no issues, as if almost there's no bear market. So it's important to remember this is a very, very US centric story. He is a United States citizen, celebrity, criminal here that's largely been forgotten and disregarded all over the world. So I think it really depends on where the media is and if the media is crypto native or mainstream. I think he's getting a more probably favorable, maybe even a fairer shake in the mainstream media, obviously, than he would be in the United States crypto media.
No, that is a great point, because that's why I want you guys out on here other than me, because that's lost on me. I'm here in the United States. I'm always getting asked questions as a lawyer about SBF, about the trial. We get consumed it and we forget that the rest of the world's moving on and they've moved on past this. But with that said, let's talk about the trial itself. We had some big names testify, obviously, in this last week and a half. Gary Wang, Caroline Ellison, and others. Scott, as a trader, as an investor, what's your take on what they've had to say so far?
It's insane to be an investor or trader in the crypto industry when you see that these things were happening and have happened. I think that they had a disproportionate effect on the price action of the last market. When you listen to the testimony, it's almost like a bull market on steroids because of their fraud and the way that they were trading and handling this market. And it makes you wonder that without that much liquidity going in and out of Alameda and these huge bets that they were taking, what that market would have looked like and what a future bull or bear market will look like with more natural price action and less manipulation. So to that end, I think it's really, really interesting study. We all know that FTT token was a massive player in that market, completely fraudulent, right? That they were using it to get these massive loans in DeFi on vaporware. I mean, the entire market was really exposed for what it is. And that's a very, amateur, it's still early, choose your meme. But clearly it wasn't ready for prime time. And so I'm hoping that what this does is obviously that we clear out all the nonsense, all the waste, all the bloat, and that we get a much more natural next bull market, obviously largely driven by perhaps a Bitcoin spot ETF, institutional involvement, and less by a bunch of Aderall riddled children gambling from their Bahamas penthouse, right? And so, I mean, I think as a trader, listen, that's what makes this market fun and profitable for a lot of people, is that there's insane volatility, that there's low liquidity, that moves are huge. That's what allowed a lot of people trading this market, including myself, to do quite well in previous cycles. But it's no fun when the bear market hits and the house of cards entirely collapses on your head.
Absolutely. Sam, what's your take on what you've heard so far from these witnesses?
To Scott's point, the fact that there was a lot of artificial manipulation in this market, I think has been made very evident by the testimonies over the last few days. A perfect example being the price of Bitcoin. We know now that Sam Bankman-Fried and Caroline Ellison actually conspired together to keep the price of Bitcoin below $20,000. And I think that's worth noting because in previous cycles, Bitcoin has not gone below its previous all-time high after it's broken it the second time. And I think that's what surprised a lot of people about the low that we had on Bitcoin around November, December last year, is that it actually fell below its previous all-time high of $20,000 back into about the $17,000 territory. We know now, though, that was completely artificial, that was something that FTX they were using their funds to keep it low. And so that is one interesting revelation. In terms of the actual court proceeding itself, I know that crypto Twitter have knives out for Caroline Ellison. But in all honesty, I think she gained the sympathy of the jury over in the trial over the past few days. And that's in large part because she has a pretty sympathetic case. I think the prosecution depicted her well as their star witness, as someone who was a girlfriend of this man who coerced her to do some pretty terrible crimes. At one point, from my understanding, she even shed tears. And I think she created a sympathetic case for herself before the jury. So it'll be interesting to see how the case turns out. But at the end of the day, I do think that the prosecution has done a pretty effective job at making SBF look like the prime villain in this case and the main instigator of these crimes.
I
Doesn't that
agree.
make you, sorry, John, doesn't that make you question what the defense is going to look like? Because they're obviously going to try to turn that around. But I mean, the notion that Caroline's not an accomplice and was just a victim is a little bit lost on me, to be quite honest, because I listened to and posted the recording of her all hands meeting right at the end, and she literally was laughing about this stuff.
Yeah,
like either she was too literally immature and stupid to understand what she was doing, or she was completely complicit and laughing it off. And it makes for a good story in front of the jury to act like she all of a sudden was the victim. So I don't disagree, Sam. I think that they did a very good job of doing that. But I think that that is a part of the prosecution's plan and not necessarily the truth of Caroline's involvement.
Yeah, I'm with you. Here's what I'm like in the middle of what you two are saying. Basically, I believe there's no doubt that was she relieved when the house of cards came down, and was she crying? Was it authentic that she had relief and that she was emotional, upset? I believe it was sincere, but at the same time, she'd still be in that role today if they didn't get busted, pretending to be, whoever she was pretending to be back then. So she deserves to sit in jail for a long time, not as nearly as long as Sam, obviously, but I'm sure there was some sincerity in it. But here's what we're talking about. This is what surprised me, guys. Testimony that 3/4 of all FTX customer funds was siphoned at one point. Like, if you got $10 billion on the platform, on what planet would you go more than 10%, right? If you're going to siphon off or steal or manipulate money or use money, I mean, I could see, not that I could see it, but if you're going to do it, don't be stupid about it. Who takes 3/4? $5 billion in loans to insiders? $5 billion? To me, that stuff was just incredible, which goes to Scott's first point, which is from day one, this was a criminal enterprise and a fraudulent scheme to steal people's money. And that's what shocked me. And one of the other things that shocked me, which enrages me, is that there was testimony that Sam said he donated $10 million to the current administration for the purposes of gaining access, which he got because he met with Gensler at least 2 times. And there was rumors of like a short form that they were working on. And when you just hear that testimony, it genuinely enrages me personally. But, what are you going to say? Okay, so let me ask, I think we've already answered how well you think the prosecution's done. You both touched on that. Can you, let's flip it though. I've already given my thoughts on the defense. What's your take, Scott, on the defense? And the same question to you, Sam.
I'm not a lawyer, so I have no idea what they can possibly say. It's so damning and so horrible when you listen to it from this perspective. And I haven't spent that much time in a courtroom, that I think they're just going to pretend that, he's going to flip it on Caroline. She was in charge of Alameda. I had nothing to do with Alameda. She should have put hedges in place. Look at this video of her saying she doesn't even use stop losses. What an idiot. I would have never, hired her if I knew that. But listen, there's just no way that he comes out of this scot-free. I think your point is exactly right. I actually had a conversation with Martin Shkreli, which is hilarious because, he went through a bit of this. And he said literally the exact same thing as you. He said, Sam Bankman-Fried should literally be like eye flirting with one female juror every second of this entire trial, giving her winks and puppy dog eyes and pretending that, he did nothing wrong because it only takes one. I think in the case, in Martin's case, I don't want to misquote him. It was either 5 out of 6 or 6 out of 7 of the charges were dropped. And that was all because of one female juror who fought for him to the end and refused to capitulate. So he only went down on one of the 7 or one of the 6 charges. And he said it's only because literally he tried to sell himself to that one person. He identified her as the potential one. listen, some of this might be hindsight, giving himself credit for something that didn't happen, but that's what he said. And that aligns with exactly what you're saying, right? And I know he was already tweeting about it and identifying certain jurors that he thought that Sam should be connecting with, and doing this exact sort of this exact campaign of innocence with. So maybe that's the only way. I can't see how the evidence could possibly play in his favor. I mean, when you have these backdoors and the loans you talked about, there's just no way to justify that. I mean, I think the truth is that we can have a criminal enterprise from the very beginning, but the guy coordinating the criminal enterprise being so oblivious to the way that the world works that he didn't believe it was a criminal enterprise. And there is part of me that thinks that Sam in some way believes he's so above the law or above the rules that anything he does is justified. If he's stealing, it's not stealing because he's going to go make a ton of money on Alameda. If one of their investments comes in and gets everybody whole, he'll be the kind of guy who says, look, I'm a God tier investor. Nobody lost any money, right? But I would like to remind people that doesn't replace the fraud. Martin Shkreli also returned money to his investors. They actually made a ton of money on him. That didn't matter to the judge when he was being convicted of these things. So I think that Sam's only chance, like you said, is to find that one juror. And I think that in his mind, he's still innocent. I really do believe that he's so narcissistic, so differently wired that he thinks that everything he did was totally fine.
Wow. Sam, you said the prosecution's doing a good job and in portraying, they even made Caroline sympathetic. What's your thoughts on the defense, on what they're doing?
Yeah, well, I agree with Scott that the preponderance of the evidence seems so stacked against Sam that they can't make many fact-based arguments to defend him in this situation. So what I found really compelling over the past couple of days, though, is his focus on Adderall. I don't know if some of your listeners have followed the case that closely, but the legal defense seems to be arguing at this point that without his Adderall, Sam is particularly addled in the courtroom that he can't concentrate. And if he were to defend himself, according to his Sixth Amendment rights, he wouldn't be able to do so without having his Adderall. And so, John, honestly, as a former federal prosecutor, I'd be really interested to know your take on this. I've heard a legal theory floated out there that the Adderall focus is actually a strategy by the defense. And that
is
what
that
they
like
hope
an
to
insanity defense? I mean, is that like its own take on an insanity defense?
Yeah,
I mean,
similar.
It's play. Listen, they had one shot. That one shot's the one juror, and all that, in my opinion. But it's to convince people, like he did when he went on his little speaking tour, and you had Kevin O'Leary saying, "Well, I'd invest money with him again," and you had Bill Ackman, I believe it is, who said, I kind of believe that the kid just let everything get away from him and it got so big, and he's got this weird risk tolerance, and he's going to make it all up, and I'll just move a little money over here. And, but the bottom line comes down to whether he's on Aderall or not on Aderall, he can't get away from the fact that from day one, he's got back doors. Just think of that. There's a back door. They called the back door their Korean friend. So you've got messages where they're using Korean friend as a code for a back door. Whether you're on Aderall or not, you can't take that. That's Sam instituting a way to access regular people's money. And what hasn't happened yet is real customers walking into that courtroom and testifying how they were financially devastated. And that's yet to come, and that's going to have a powerful impact, I believe. Listen, you guys know I got involved in the Ripple case because I didn't expect Ripple to care about the XRP holders, because their whole defense was that they don't owe XRP holders a damn thing, because it's not owning XRP gives them no rights to the company or any of that kind of stuff. And so in the FTX case, how does the SEC miss something so detrimental to the average investor, Sam?
Yeah, I mean, I hate to say this, but I think it's because the SEC at the end of the day doesn't care about the retail investor in the way it claims to. So let's take a closer look at that. If the SEC really cared about the little guy, why would it have Knives Out for crypto, which is the most democratic retail-driven financial movement in the history of the world? And if the SEC really cared about the little guy, why would it attack the on-ramps retail uses to access this economy? Why would it concentrate so much of its legal firepower in blocking a spot Bitcoin ETF? I mean, it just doesn't really add up. And so people always ask, what's crypto's use case? I always tell them it has many, but perhaps the greatest use case that crypto has shown to have so far is exposing the SEC for what it really is. I mean, thanks to the SEC's vendetta against crypto, the American people are starting to see this three-letter agency for what it really is, which is an agency that more or less has been hijacked by corporate interests. The sad truth, and I'll just be honest about this, there's a dirty secret here in Washington. It's a town full of revolving doors. And the revolving door between DC and Wall Street spins so fast it could generate its own electricity. And I think case in point is our chair, Chair Gary Gensler at the SEC. We know he made millions on Wall Street before he took over the helm. Where's he likely to go after the fact? And then you think too, who do the leadership at the SEC, people like Gary Gensler, who do they rub shoulders with every day? Is it the grandma who just bought her first Bitcoin? Is it the teenager who just downloaded Coinbase for the first time? Or is it their buddies back on Wall Street? I think there's real regulatory capture at the SEC that has gone overlooked for too long. And I think that regulatory capture has been laid bare by cryptocurrency as a movement. I think people are starting to recognize, wait a second, with the SEC trying to do everything it can to stop a Bitcoin ETF or to attack Coinbase, to attack the XRP army, it's not really looking out for the interests of retail investors at the end of the day. And so that's why, in my view, it's no wonder something like FTX happened, because I don't think at the end of the day, SEC all the time has the interests of retail investors in mind.
If they cared about the retail investor, Scott, why would they ask the judge to throw off a lovable guy like me off the case? You know what I mean?
That's the number one question. If they cared about the investor, why would they approve Bitcoin futures ETFs and not Bitcoin spot ETFs? So we know that a Bitcoin futures ETF doesn't accurately track the spot market, is more ripe for manipulation than a Bitcoin spot ETF would be. And a Bitcoin spot ETF would protect investors from a 50% discount on GBTC, which was the only way that institutional investors could gain access to this market, and would allow people to invest in a product that's insured, that tracks the market accurately with really low fees. To me, that's the most glaring example of exactly what Sam's talking about, that they don't really care about retail at all. Now, we have to also be honest, right? There's a ton of fraud. There's a ton of waste. Absolutely. There's a ton of con men. There's a ton of scammers in the crypto industry. But last time I checked, fraud and scams were illegal, whether they were in crypto or whether it was a guy delivering a huge check to your door and pretending that you had won something, or calling your grandma and telling her that she was getting sued by the IRS, right? These scams have existed since the beginning of time, and crypto just happens to be a really good medium for doing it. But that doesn't mean that you should take an attack on the entire asset class. Also, if we're being honest, there's been a revolving door of late between Washington and the crypto industry. Right. Absolutely. A lot of the commissioners from the CFTC, Brian Brooks went to work in crypto. Jake Clayton has a huge role in crypto. So that's not unique to Wall Street, but Wall Street's doing it on 100 times larger scale and for 100 times longer than crypto has probably existed. All of that said, it's very clear that the SEC's intentional view is to keep everything as vague as possible so that they can regulate by enforcement, right? The minute that they pass a rule, they can't just go willy-nilly off and attack everybody and sue everybody and make cute videos about Kim Kardashian, who, by the way, as much as Ethereum Max was a scam, Kim Kardashian disclosed that she was being paid very clearly. They were mad that she didn't disclose how much she was being paid. So if the fact that they made an example out of Kim Kardashian, who never even admitted guilt, doesn't show you exactly what they're trying to do, Gary Gensler is basically using his attack on crypto, to benefit the interests of Joe Biden and Elizabeth Warren. This all comes from Elizabeth Warren, by the way, if anyone was curious. That's not conspiracy theory. There's tons of evidence of it. She has her staffers in the White House telling Biden his policy. Literally part of her deal for supporting Biden, everybody quietly knows, was that Gary Gensler would be the chairman of the SEC. She would be able to represent the interests of the big banks that she pretends to rail about, and would be able to attack crypto as a part of that. But listen, Gary Gensler has that mandate. But the other thing Gary Gensler has is a platform to try to run for Secretary of the Treasury or some other job that he thinks he's going to get, because he's using this as a job audition. And he thinks that making these cute videos and cracking down on celebrities and going after Coinbase and Ripple is going to help him get the next job. I think he's going to be sadly disappointed when he finds out that quite literally everybody except for Elizabeth Warren hates him at this point, and that he's pushed too far. But I really think that the SEC wants these things to collapse. They want quietly retail to be hurt so that they can then make this big effort and this, use these as advertisements for how they're protecting us by attacking these people after the fact, which literally helps nobody, right? I mean, they should have got Voyager, Celsius, BlockFi. Listen, FTX wasn't on shore, to be fair. FTX, even though Sam Bankman-Fried is American, FTX was not technically regulated by the United States. FTX US was, but a lot of these other ones were very directly based in the United States, servicing United States investors, and probably should have been very much targeted before this all went down. It just seems like they go after everyone after the fact. They punish the CEO after the fact, but none of that helps retail. And then, John, let's not even talk about how we all end up in bankruptcy and what a fraudulent process that is.
Oh my God! The only bull market that is maintained is the bankruptcy lawyers, and the amount of money that they make is obscene. I mean, look at Sullivan and Cromwell, how much money they made to advise FTX, and then they're the attorneys handling the bankruptcy. And you're talking about like fees like $1 million a day. It's just absolutely absurd. And here's the thing, as we wrap up, what Scott said is, listen, this FTX trial is not about cryptocurrency. It's about fraud. It's about lying. It's about thieves stealing regular people's money to buy luxury real estate, to make political donations, to get billboards with your picture and your furry hair out there to the world, to portray as this, the savior of the world who wants to run for president, all these things. That's what this case is about. And, this is the thing is yesterday, and we saw Bitcoin spike 10% on fake news. And I was sitting there thinking what Scott's been talking about is you got Canada, Brazil, Amsterdam, Singapore, Germany, Dubai, Australia, all of these.
Hong Kong, China.
Yes, my God, China. You got all these places have a spot Bitcoin ETF. And Scott's already talked about how that's much better for the retail investors, certainly better than a 2-time leveraged futures and a derivative and a short and all the others that have been granted. So I guess the question is, let me ask you, Sam, what do you think? What do you think about that idea that if the SEC had approved a spot ETF like so many other countries, that Sam wouldn't have been able to actually sell customers Bitcoin without their knowledge in order to make donations to the people who are now going to use the fake news as a way to potentially argue against a spot ETF again?
Yeah, no, 100%. I think there's a really strong case to be made for that. I mean, look at it this way. The truth is both retail and Wall Street have been looking for a safe path into Bitcoin for years by this point. And as you pointed out, John, there's so many countries that have already approved a spot point Bitcoin ETF. But at every turn, the SEC has denied these applications for an ETF. In the meantime, Bitcoin's proven itself to be an anti-fragile asset and one that has withstood the test of time. And so the narrative that Bitcoin is a form of digital gold honestly is stronger today than it's ever been before. And if that weren't the case, BlackRock wouldn't even be paying attention right now. But for whatever reason, over the past several years, the SEC has refused to play ball. And what that's done is it's forced retail to take outsized risks by accessing Bitcoin through companies that are based overseas, like FTX, companies that aren't publicly vetted and have the bulk of their operations offshore. And so that sets up a really dangerous and risky scenario for retail investors. So let's consider sort of an alternative history. Let's suppose the SEC had approved a spot Bitcoin ETF years ago. At that point, US customers could have accessed Bitcoin through a highly trusted and publicly audited asset manager, a name like BlackRock or Fidelity. But instead of that, the SEC's stonewalling has forced customers to put their trust in the likes of SBF, and we all know how that turned out.
Right. Scott, I want you to take us out, finish the show. You already got one of my favorite quotes. I wish I could remember. We're gonna put it out there on social media. Aderall taking child. What you said something that was
I don't know. Aderall riddled children, something like that. But yeah, Sam, you made the best point. Like talking about BlackRock, Fidelity. These are huge players that are looking to get an approval of a Bitcoin spot ETF. Larry Fink was on TV yesterday and said that crypto, didn't say Bitcoin, he actually said crypto is a flight to quality alongside US treasuries and gold. and that's what it's going to be viewed as. People seem to have missed in the fact that they applied for a Bitcoin spot ETF, that in their last yearly investment letter, Larry Fink and BlackRock went on a very long tirade about the future of finance being tokenization and tokenizing assets and everything trading digitally. We just saw BlackRock settle the first transaction on JP Morgan Onyx, which was a tokenized mutual fund sent to Barclays Bank. This is happening with or without the SEC, and these players are more powerful than the SEC. Some people say, there's a joke that it's the judicial, executive, and legislative branch of the United States, and that the fourth one is BlackRock. I would just say that BlackRock's all four of them, right? one way or another. And so when you have Larry Fink, who, in my opinion, is a much more powerful and reputable person than Gary Gensler, on TV calling Bitcoin and crypto a flight to quality, you know that this is inevitably coming. But as to your question, whether this would have stopped Sam, I would love to make that argument, but I think that Sam is a fraudster. Sam's a criminal. Sam's the type of person that would have found a way in crypto to do this regardless. He didn't make his money in a way that was opposed to the Bitcoin spot ETF. He made it offering 100x leverage on shitcoins, pardon my language, that existed for 30 seconds before they listed them and put 100x leverage on them, right? They could literally create a token, offer 100x leverage. It was proven now that they didn't even have a liquidation engine. It was all a fraud. They had no real insurance fund, and they were watching the trades that their own customers had so they could sweep the stops and take their money. So not only was he running a casino that should have made billions of dollars, he was then cheating against his own customers in that casino, and then somehow stealing all of that money after that, sending it to his own hedge fund, and still was too incompetent to keep this money. I mean, it's mind-blowing, but I think a Bitcoin spot ETF would have had zero effect on this FTX fraud. Sam was the kind of guy who, whether crypto existed or not, whether a spot ETF existed or not, he would have been a criminal who would have probably made billions of dollars and been a fraud, and we'd be in the same place. But maybe I don't have such a rosy opinion of him coming from this industry and seeing what he did to it. But I think the guy's a fraud, and he would have built something in this industry that would have done this regardless.
No, I agree 100%. And I think that Sam is going to get a very lengthy sentence. I believe he's got to testify. If he doesn't testify, then he should have thrown himself on the mercy of the court, because that's when he had his best chance of getting the lighter sentence. After all that victim impact testimony and forcing a trial of 4 to 6 weeks, the judge is going to hammer him if he's found guilty. So I think we're going to get to look forward to Sam trying. Hopefully he has his Aderall with him so he can pay attention and answer the questions the right way and give an Oscar-like performance, because that's what it's going to require. Guys, thanks so much for coming on. I hope to have you on down the road, and thanks so much next week. See everyone out there.
Thanks, John.
Thank you, man.
Thanks.